Good afternoon. We are speaking with the Guyana's ambassador, actually, to the United Nations, Her Excellency Carolyn Rodrigues Burkett. I almost said minister because I remember you were the former foreign minister. But ambassador, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Felicia, for having me.
All right, first of all, this appointment as Ghana's ambassador to the United Nations, how was it when President Ali asked you to serve in that capacity?
Well, the president made a request, and it's always, I guess, an honor and a privilege to serve your country, and especially at this time for Guyana. And so I said yes.
Did it dawn on you that this was a remarkable thing? I mean, from one Guyanese woman to another, did you feel any sort of way?
Well, at the time, maybe not, but afterwards, there were people contacting me and they asked me if I was aware that I'm the first Guyanese woman to serve in this position as permanent representative to the UN. And I felt proud about that because one of the big drives of the UN is gender equality. And I know that this is also very dear to Guyana. And
Yes.
if this appointment could make an advancement in that direction, then I think it's a good thing for Guyana and, of course, for me at the personal level. But also, it was a source of pride, I would say, when I was told yesterday by the president of the General Assembly that there are not many ambassadors, especially women ambassadors, who are indigenous. And I
Okay.
thought that that was also significant. But more than about me, I think this is about Guyana and President Ali making a decision to appoint a woman. I think it's a good thing.
So we women believe so as well. I must say, as the ambassador now, you assume the chairmanship of the G77 group. Uh, Getting into that, what does that mean for Guyana essentially?
But the G77, as you know, is a group of 134 countries. The ordinary man might get confused, well, why you call it 77, but it's because at its formulation there were 77 countries, and so the name G77 remains. But it's a group of 134 countries, and as you know, the UN has a membership of 193. So this is a very significant group, and together they represent, I would say, the South. They are also a group that negotiates on the economic aspects of course, of development, involved in other things as well, but certainly on the economic aspects of development. And they also promote South-South cooperation among countries. And so I think for Guyana to chair this group, and the chairmanship rotates every year, it's an important step. But let me also say that given our protracted election period and COVID 19, that would have had an impact on our chairmanship. However, I think that in the circumstances, Guyana has done very well in pushing forward with the work of the chairmanship. We're one in the 134 carrying this forward. We speak for the group on the issues they want us to speak on. So I think it's a very significant chairmanship.
All right, just for clarity, how much more time do we have as chair of the group?
The chairmanship ends in December. It started in January and it ends in December.
All right, I know the ultimate goal is, of course, to showcase Ghana. So, what will be our platform basically? What are we putting forth first?
Well, we assume the chairmanship uh, uh, um, in a very important year, I would say. It is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. It's also a year the year that begins the decade of delivery on sustainable development. But
Yes.
it's also the year where we have seen quite a lot, or I would say a bit of pushback on multilateralism. And then added to all of that, we have the COVID pandemic. So it is a very significant year for more reasons than one. And Guyana, as I said, is one of the 134. And what we have done so far, for example, is we have spoken about the pandemic. And as I said, we're speaking on behalf of the group of 77 in China. And so we've spoken on the pandemic, but we have spoken specifically as well on the pandemic as it relates to debt. As you know, many countries were heavily indebted before the pandemic came. And with the pandemic, this has caused even more problems for those countries. And so this was an issue that we amplified through our voice as the chairman. As soon as the government took office, President Ali's government took office, he also spoke at the Summit on Biodiversity, calling for a halt to the degradation of biodiversity. He also spoke at the 75th anniversary event of the UN, again reiterating the need for solidarity, the need for multilateralism to be stronger, not weaker. And so we have been speaking out on these issues that are dear to Guyana, but dear to the rest of the group as well.
All right. As chair and as leader per se, you spoke about talking about debt that countries are facing in the wake of COVID-19. Has there been a particular plan, or are you working on a plan right now that you're able to share a little bit about?
Well, the issue of debt is actually being discussed in several different fora. They just concluded the IMF World Bank meeting, and you probably would have seen the reports coming out of that meeting, but also their discussions in the G20 as well on this issue. I think what has been striking is the work of the SIDS and the small island developing states. And even though we're not an island, we're part of that group and we subscribe to many of the issues for action in that group. And SIDS have been pushing for a particular categorization because many of them are classified as middle income or high income countries. And because of that, they are not able to access the kind of finances on concessionary terms as it would be if they were not classified in that way. And so they've been asking to classify them differently in the sense that they must cater for the other vulnerabilities of SIDS as a result of climate change, for example. And there is a bit of, in my opinion, a pushback in not having that kind of classification. And this would be extremely devastating if they're not able to receive the kind of assistance to help them during this period of the pandemic because they depend on tourism. And this, as you know, we don't have a lot of tourists at this point in time because of the pandemic. Guyana is in a little bit of a better position in terms of our, we've started producing oil,
Yes.
but we also have our challenges, and we are going to be in solidarity with these countries. So the debt issue is, but it's not only about its countries, the least developed countries, the landlocked developing countries as well are facing significant issues. The pandemic has been, for want of a better word, very democratic. It has touched all corners of the world. Every country in this world is affected. And this is why the G77 will remain seized of these issues, of this issue, because it's very, very important and it's unprecedented in its scope and impacts.
All right. As we're on the topic of the pandemic, I know that a lot of countries are being offered assistance in terms of the new vaccine that, well, several vaccines that are being worked on right now. But is there any other financial aid being discussed by the group for those developing countries?
Well, the group is discussing these issues, of course, and we, as I mentioned, we are 134 countries, but part of the UN system, and the UN, I think, the Secretary General in particular has taken a really good leadership role on this issue. And so we are part of those discussions. There is a shortfall. You've probably heard about COVAX, but
Yes.
there is a shortfall of resources, and we're hoping that those resources are going to be made available. And when the vaccine is available, our hope is that those who need it most would get it first. And
Yes.
not only those who are rich would get it first, but also those countries who are not so rich and might be even more affected than those countries that are richer, so to speak.
All right. Now, in terms of Ghana specifically, what sort of mark you want us to make? Of course, keeping in line with the president's vision for Ghana on the international level.
Well, you are probably aware that on the 30th of this month, the 29th and 30th of this month, we would be having what we call a flagship event. And basically, what this event is going to do, or is going to focus on, is on maintaining a low carbon development path in the context of COVID, keeping our eyes on achieving the sustainable development agenda. And this event is being held by us in our capacity as chair of the G77 and China. But what we are trying to do here is to remind the world that yes, we have the pandemic, and yes, we have to deal with the pandemic, but that should not put a low carbon development pathway to sustainable development on the back burner. As you know, our government, and in particular, I would say the PPP civic government, we have for many, many years been pushing for a low carbon development path. We have done our part in Guyana on that. And so this event will bring together a number of ministers and experts, including the executive secretary of the UNFCCC. We have the head of ECLAC would be there. We would also have the assistant secretary general, who is a special advisor on climate change to the Secretary General of the UN. And we will have the UN Secretary General as well sending a message at that meeting, in addition to President Ali's address and Minister Todd. And in those discussions, we would benefit as well from former President and now Vice President Jagdeo's expertise on these issues, both the climate issue, but also the development issue, and in addition to a number of other experts. So in terms of what Guyana, I think, would bring in these last months, because we're in the last months of this chairmanship, I think is that reminder that we must not forego what we have committed to in the Paris Agreement, in several other agreements, in the Sustainable Development Goals, just because we have COVID now. In fact, we have to accelerate it even more so because of the pandemic.
All right. In terms of Guyana's own leadership, I should say, I was looking for another word, but in terms of going forward, what would you say is most important for the world to see? Guyana is a developing country, and we're now going to be a producer of oil. And by right, the president is saying that we should reduce our carbon footprint. What would you want the world to remember most about Ghana and this particular period?
Well, I would say from this event, and there are two actually. There's the flagship event we're having, and there's a ministerial meeting of the G77, which is the regular ministerial meeting that happens every year. It usually happens in the margins of the General Assembly, but because of COVID now, it's going to take place on the 12th of November. And that is basically where the group would, through the declaration, indicate all of the priorities, reiterating the need for more development finance at good terms for the developing world, reiterating that we need to keep on track with the sustainable development agenda. And so that's the group, I would say, putting forward its position and amplified through the declaration that we have. What I should also indicate that we are, as you know, a very small country. And it doesn't mean that because you're a small country, you cannot take on leadership roles as we have done here with the chairmanship of the G77. We have a small group of people working very hard every day. You cannot see it, I would say, the work that is happening here in New York, because many times it's difficult for people to translate what is happening in a lot of the committees in the UN to their everyday lives. But this is the place where it's a global laboratory, I would say, for solutions for global issues. And so when we talk about a low carbon development path and the climate change agreement, this is where these decisions and these commitments have been made. And you ask what Guyana would be remembered for. Well, it is our chairmanship. I'm pretty late in the game, as you know. We have a few months, but I think that notwithstanding the circumstances in which we took this chairmanship, I think we have done well. I have colleagues, staff from the mission here, leading the discussions on the budget for the United Nations, for example. I have staff here leading the discussion on the communications in the United Nations, how the organization gets its message out there. We have staff in the discussions on climate leading these discussions. And so while you're talking to me and you are not seeing them, we have a good group here. And also in Guyana, we have a good group. Dr. Paulette Bino is working on the climate issues, leading that discussion from Capital. Now that we have a virtual world, you can do that from there.
Yes.
So there's a lot that's happening. And I think that the flagship event, which will culminate with a communique, I think would also indicate some of the priorities for the G77, but the priorities for Ghana, because it's also held under the auspices of, in the capacity, of our chairmanship.
Normal man on the street will hear all these big words and big things and not really see how it's going to benefit them directly. So can you tell basically the man in the street, how important is this chairmanship for our country?
That's always a problem. I used to be in the foreign ministry before, and I recall being introduced one time in a school, and the teacher told the children, this is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and her work is foreign affairs, because they couldn't perhaps see how that is related to the everyday life. But as I mentioned earlier, the work that we do here in the United Nations, it revolves around global solutions for global problems. So, for example, the pandemic is a global issue, and we have to solve that with global solutions. So when the Group of 77 and China came out in support, issuing a statement in support of the work of the WHO, for example, how does that translate to the man in the street? Is so that we would be able to get vaccines when they become available. We'd be able to get that on time and early. And of course, the WHO is very central to that we would be able to have, testing facilities available in our countries. But more than all of that is that we must be prepared for any future pandemic and not be caught like we've been caught in this one. And so we are part of that international community calling for these things to be put in place, working for these things to be put in place. And so I just wanted to give that example with respect to the pandemic.
All right, Ambassador, as we get ready to wrap up, I want to ask you now, once G77 is over, you still remain our ambassador to the United Nations. And I know you've outlined a number of areas that you will be focused on. What else will we be see coming from you?
Well, I, I guess I would have to ensure that we communicate better our work. The government is very keen on communicating its work and being in touch with the people. And even though, I'm based here in New York, we need to ensure that we get that information of what we're doing out here. But there are a number of issues. We're an oil producing country now. And I think it's important for us to learn from the mistakes of others. And it's also important to learn from those who have done it well. And a lot of this work is already happening back home. But the UN has a footprint all over the world. And they have seen where it works, where it doesn't work. And so they would remain a very important partner for us. So whether it is a UNDP in Guyana, whether it is UNICEF or any of the UN agencies, FAO, where I worked before, I still see my role here as ensuring that we benefit from the services that are available and that those institutions can provide, of course, working closely with colleagues back home and with the local offices as well. The other issue too is, we are going to be working to ensure that our territorial integrity is intact. As you know, that case is now before the International Court of Justice, and we're going to be following that closely. But that referral of that case originated here in New York. In fact, it was 2014 when I came to ask the Secretary General to have it referred to the ICJ. And so the UN is very important in that process for us as well. I mentioned early on gender. We also, this is something that I've seen, we've been focusing quite a bit on it in Guyana as well, but it's a big thing here. And so we are going to be very active in those discussions and on Indigenous peoples as well. As you know, there's the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. There's the expert group on Indigenous peoples. And we've had in the past one representative on the Permanent Forum, but I think this is something we need to work towards having again, to bring our issues here, to share our experience, because Guyana has a lot of good experiences to share. We're not just a country that wants to receive, but we also have good things to share as well. And I think here we have a very good platform to do that. And another issue is that within the UN system, there is a lack, I would say, of proper representation or adequate representation of our nationals in the UN agencies. As a group in CARICOM, we have been talking about this, that we need to have our nationals in these institutions represented based on our size, so that, okay, once they get in there, they're working for the UN. But I think it's good to have perspectives from our region. So this is something that I would join with my colleagues as well in pushing for. So there is quite a bit here, I think, and where there are opportunities for bilateral cooperation, bilateral collaboration, I would certainly be pushing that too, because New York is the place where you have representation from almost all of the countries. And I think we can make use of our presence here by developing stronger relations and concrete collaboration as well. So I just thought I should mention those.
Of course, good. Just one thing, it will be remiss of me not to ask you about agriculture. This is another huge area, and I know this particular administration has been very vocal and forceful in terms of developing agriculture. Would there be any particular representation in that regard?
Yes, well, there's our mission in Geneva. It's accredited to the FAO from Geneva. As you know, FAO is based in Rome, but a lot also happens in New York on this issue. In fact, one of my first tasks here, since assuming the office of permanent representative, was to speak in the second committee of the UN and agriculture and food security on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. But also, we will have next year the summit on food security, on food systems, sorry. And that summit will be discussing a number of issues relating to agriculture and food security. I should indicate that I see Guyana playing a very important role in this. As you know, we have the lead in CARICOM for agriculture in the region, and we need to push this in every fora, as we have to do more on the ground at home. And I see Minister Zulfikar doing quite a bit on this front.
Yes.
But it's the world is going to have a population of about 10 billion people by 2050. That's a lot of food that we need to produce for people to
Yes.
eat. And I think there's an opportunity in that for Guyanas in terms of increasing our exports. But before even increasing our exports, ensuring that we are food secured. So when I think, for example, about our poultry production, we talk about being self sufficient in poultry. But when you look at the feed, we're importing a lot of the ingredients for the feed. So we're not fully self sufficient. And so we have to ensure that in our work, we become self sufficient, we increase our exports, but we also be present in the fora, in the international community to speak about the importance of agriculture, and especially about agriculture in rural areas. I'm from Moruca, as you know.
Yes.
Most of my family and most of the people there are engaged in subsistence agriculture. But some of the poorest people in this world are farmers.
Sadly,
And that
yes.
is a terrible contradiction because they feed us, and yet they're some of the poorest people. And so, as we advocate for proper infrastructure and for proper financing for those things at the global level, we would also be looking for opportunities as how we can contribute to what is happening at the national level. And when I say we, I mean the mission here in New York.
Of course. Ambassador Rodrigues Burkett, thank you so much for joining us. But let me just allow you a few more minutes for any parting words and, any refreshment on the G77.
Well, I think it's the two main events that would end our chairmanship would be the flagship event on the 29th and 30th, and the ministerial meeting on the 12th of November. And we are working very hard for both of these events to be successful, so that Guyana will leave with its good name intact, I
Yeah.
would say, and that with while it may look like just having meetings, these meetings are very, very important for us to put our heads together in the international community to discuss not just the challenges that we face, but the solutions that are there. And Guyana will benefit from that in those discussions that would be had. We would be able to share our experiences, but also to benefit from others. And I think that we would be able to conclude the chairmanship, notwithstanding how it was started. I think we should be able to conclude it in a good way. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And may God bless you, and know that you're standing with all of Ghana behind you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you
Bye.